overt confrontation could trigger World War III. To disguise U.S. involvement, the secret program requires the cooperation of several Islamic countries sympathetic to the Afghan Jihad, or Holy War. Saudi Arabia agrees to help put up the money, and Pakistan accepts the job of getting the cash and guns into the hands of the Afghans. Pakistani General Hamid Gul will be the gatekeeper through which U.S. arms and money must pass on their way into Afghanistan. Today, Gul is a militant Islamist who has publicly called for Muslims to attack American troops wherever they are deployed. But during the 1980s, he was eager to help the United States fight the Soviets.
The Red Menace had to be defeated. It was a daunting task. Pakistan took up the challenge.
Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI, will transfer ever-increasing amounts of American money and sophisticated weaponry over the legendary Khyber Pass and into the hands of the Mujahideen. U.S. spending on the CIA's Afghan program grows from $30 million in 1981 to $200 million by 1984, with Saudi Arabia matching every dollar. Soon, the Afghan resistance is doing better than CIA officers ever thought possible. Mujahideen warriors have killed or wounded an estimated 17,000 Soviet soldiers. Victor Munayan was a Red Army medic who saw many of his fellow soldiers return from the battlefield in body bags.
Some were captured. We would recover pieces of soldiers. Only with the pieces could we identify who it was.
The ferocity of the Afghan resistance now forces the Soviets to consider quadrupling their troop deployment. But the Afghans are getting reinforcements too. Thousands of Islamic volunteers from all over the world are arriving in Pakistan to join the jihad. Among the volunteers is a wealthy young Saudi named Osama bin Laden. It's the height of the Cold War, and the Soviet Union wages a brutal campaign in Afghanistan. Between 1980 and 1981, a newcomer from Saudi Arabia arrives to join the rebels trying to oust the Soviets, Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden brings money and an expertise in construction, according to two men who worked alongside the future Al-Qaida leader.
He started building mountainside caves for storage of ammunition, and started building roads. And then he was very generous with money. He was popular among all Mujahideen.
When he was with us, helping the poor, widows, orphans, organizing funds for some needy peoples, we had no problem with him at all.
At the time, little about bin Laden suggests the terrorist leader he will become. During the Afghan-Soviet War, the CIA was aware of him, but had no reason to view bin Laden as a threat, says former spy Michael Scheuer.
The first time we heard about Osama bin Laden, he was involved first in refugee care in the camps in Pakistan, and then we heard that he moved into Afghanistan and began to have a unit of Arabs that he commanded. But he was on the side of the Angels then. He was killing Russians, and so we didn't pay much attention to him.
Today, U.S. intelligence officers deny they had any direct contact with bin Laden. They say that U.S. aid went only to the Afghans, not to foreign Islamic volunteers.
There are those in the media who just love to make the point that the CIA trained the Afghan Arabs and bin Laden.
It's a popular theory, but it's not one that has much traction.
People like bin Laden came with their own money, a built-in hatred for America, and access to weaponry either from their own sources or from the Pakistanis. They wanted nothing to do with us.
Pakistani journalist Rahimullah Yousafzai is one of the few reporters to interview bin Laden more than once. He says that foreign Arab fighters like bin Laden had little use for the CIA.
There was so much of Arab money coming here. that they didn't need to get money from the CIA or ISI.
Charitable contributions from Saudi Arabia are rich enough to support not only the Mujahideen, but also the many Afghan civilians made refugees by the ongoing fighting. Over 4 million Afghans are forced to flee their homes for Pakistan.
1/3 of the population was made homeless for a very long period of time.
Here, along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, money from Saudi Arabia sets up hundreds of Islamic schools or madrasas to offer a free education for the Afghan refugee children. These madrasa students are known as talibs or Taliban. Their teachers are local mullahs like Muhammad Omar. Even today, Afghan children memorize and recite verses from the Quran. But during the desperate time of the Soviet war, many of these Islamic schools were used for a different purpose.
In certain areas, these madrasas were used to train the people and to send out the jihadis into Afghanistan.
Mullahs like Muhammad Omar send the Taliban to fight the Soviets with America's blessing, according to current Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf.
Taliban were the heroes in those days. People from madrasas were given military training, armed and sent across by us, by United States, by everyone.
By the summer of 1986, the war begins to tip back in favor of the Soviet Union, despite the influx of Taliban, Arab volunteer mercenaries, and ever-increasing American arms and money. The Soviets have shifted their strategy to exploit the Afghans' biggest weakness. The Mujahideen have no effective air defense system. Unchallenged, communist gunships pummel the Mujahideen fronts and devastate Afghan refugee camps.
It was a difficult time, wounded and handicaps, orphans, widows.
The Afghans simply aren't equipped to fight the Soviet Air Force.
If we wanted the Russians to be beaten, Mujahideen had to have an air defense capability.
With the help of this top-secret American-made anti-aircraft weapon, the war is about to take a decisive turn. The Stinger is a shoulder-launched missile that uses heat sensors to lock onto low-flying aircraft. Stinger missiles have devastating accuracy, up to 11,000 feet of altitude. On September 26, 1986, the Afghans prepare to use the new weapon for the first time. The Mujahideen say a prayer, aim skyward, and fire. The Soviet aircraft plummets harmlessly toward the Earth.
When the Stinger was introduced, it made all the difference. This was a turning point.
After we received the Stinger, we were able to master in big numbers. I will bring Mujahideens from different provinces together, make a very mighty force out of them.
Soviet pilots learned to fear the Stinger so much that they often refused to fly low enough to hit their targets. For the first time since the war began, a Mujahideen victory actually seems possible. Soviet Prime Minister Mikhail Gorbachev faces a painful choice.
What the Stinger did is to force Gorbachev and the Politburo to a decision point. They decided they had bled enough.
3 years later, the world watches the final chapter in one of history's biggest upsets. On February 15, 1989, the Soviet Union completes a full retreat from Afghanistan.